At a latitude of 45 degrees, the central South Island of New Zealand is subjected to hot, dry northwesterly weather during summer and cold, frosty winters. Mike Brosnan at Riverside Farm in the Hakataramea Valley has developed techniques such as land use fencing, conservation tillage, sheep mulching and fodder banking to create an ecologically sustainable farming system that is economically viable. 29 years ago, when Mike began to farm this 600-hectare property on the dry eastern slopes of the Hakataramea Valley, it was being cropped for cereals. With an average rainfall of 430 millimetres, the light, shallow soils produced poor yields. The property includes 2 levels of river terrace with steep facings in between. The best soils were on the lower terrace, so this is where the development began. Border dike irrigation was constructed, and the pasture produced guaranteed hay crops and fattening feed for lambs during dry summers. Fast-growing poplar trees were planted and fenced to provide shelter and shade. The tall, straight Lombardy poplars got the benefit of the irrigation water and grew well. Along the river, willow planting was started to protect the pastures from flooding. The dense, shrubby Incana willows have been particularly successful at protecting the riverbanks and reducing floodwater damage.
This is a good example of the river protection work that we've been doing over the years. The Incana willow again, an amazing plant. It's like an octopus. It's not an upright plant, it's more of a prostrate plant. It sort of grows down along the ground, and you can see in there's massive build-up of silt in there. Whereas years ago it was the opposite, the river was coming in, taking the bank away. And there's many an acre been lost here to the river previous to doing this work.
The next development was on the upper terraces. These flat areas of light, fertile soils provided ideal growing conditions for lucerne. Between the terraces, the shady faces were aerially oversown and top-dressed with seed and fertiliser. The initial clover growth was remarkable. The steep sunny faces were favourite sheep camping places and continued to grow only annual grasses and weeds. Trees were planted onto these areas, but success and growth rates were restricted by the dry summer periods. By now, the property was supporting 3,000 Corriedale sheep. Top quality lucerne hay was produced, and up to 20,000 bales were sold annually. Fertiliser applications were maintained, and a new house and woolshed were built. But by 1980, Mike had become concerned by the ecological effects of his farming methods. Monocultures of lucerne, the lack of earthworms and organic matter in the soil, the lack of humus on the surface, the annual applications of superphosphate in sprays, and the lack of habitat for birds and insects. Although lucerne is a deep-rooting species, the plants thin out over the years. Weeds establish between these plants and are either sprayed out or die during a drought, exposing bare ground. Frost heave, trampling by stock, and overgrazing during droughts loosens the soil surface, allowing the westerly winds to blow the topsoil from the paddocks. Over the years, this loss of soil and litter leaves the lucerne plants pedestaled. Mike realised that if his present methods of farming continued, in a few decades there would be no topsoil left. A whole new philosophy was needed, which accepted and worked with nature. The first remedy was to stop spraying the weeds from the lucerne paddocks. This reduced costs, and the weed cover reduced the wind erosion. It made sense to replace the weeds with productive companion plants to complement the lucerne, so in 1982, Mike and local soil conservator, Al Shearer, set up farm-scale trials. Because of the risk of wind erosion and the need to retain the lucerne plants, conventional cultivation was replaced by conservation tillage. An old lucerne paddock was sprayed to remove weeds, and 12 different plant species were over-drilled in rows across the direction of the wind. Phalaris, wheatgrass and tall oatgrass were particularly impressive.
This is a grass known as tall oatgrass. One of the things we've been working on here is what we call bunch grasses. Grasses that bunch up and create a tussock-like effect and create microclimates in between. And this tall oatgrass is good for that. They've done very well.
This trial became the site for numerous field days concerning wind erosion, conservation tillage and dryland plant species. Mike began over-drilling his lucerne paddocks. Spraying to remove competitive weeds was essential for successful pasture establishment. The seeding rate, drilling depth and time of sowing were also critical. Initially, an individual species of grass was over-drilled into each paddock, but as Mike considered the seasonal growth patterns of different grass species and the benefit of herbs for stock health, a seed mix was developed. Small quantities of brome, tall fescue, cocksfoot, wheatgrass, oatgrass and phalaris, along with sheep's burnet, chicory and yarrow were drilled together.
Well, this is a good example of direct drilling. This was direct drill exactly a year ago. It's again, it's a mixed herb blade, a mixture of species, and what we've got here is about 8 different varieties of plants, good ground cover for wind erosion, and the different species for stock health. So we're pretty thrilled with that, really. Well, this is chicory, one of the plants, one in the mixture. It's a wonderful herb. In fact, you can eat it yourself. There you are.
Mike now began managing his dryland pasture species as a crop to achieve maximum sustained production. This involved removing no more than 50% of growth at any grazing during the growing season and no more than 70% of herbage after the growing season. This take half and leave half grazing technique got excellent responses in plant vigour, production and protection of the soil. The improved ground cover and build-up of litter also made the soil suitable for the introduction of earthworms, which had not survived in the previous lucerne pasture.
So this is the quite a good example of the sheet mulching, really. We put a mob of sheep in. There's 700 ewe lambs there that have just been put in here, and they're busy eating away some of this and they're knocking the rest down, turning it into organic matter. And this is how we build the organic matter from the soil, which then creates an environment for the worms to get going. Seems to be working.
Mike began using a machine which cut small squares of turf from an area rich in earthworms.
Worms, that's what we want.
These were transplanted onto the over-drilled paddocks.
With all this cover and all this organic matter that we're breaking down, it's building up organic matter. Here we are. And you can see here where the worms are actually working. There's the casts there. And if we dig there, we'll probably find a few. Oh yeah, down in there I saw. In there. Here fellas. Here we are, here's more. Worms everywhere.
During a severe drought in 1985, many pastures in the district were damaged by grass scrub, overgrazing and wind erosion. The farmers formed a resource conservation committee which actively promoted the dryland plant species, conservation tillage and grazing management techniques successfully trialled at Riverside. As a result, when the rains came, the damaged pastures were overdrilled with dryland species. The next area of concern at Riverside were the sunny faces. During the drought, the only green grass to be found was in the shelter of matagari, briar or coprosma shrubs. A trial of shelter and shrub species was required. This began with the erection of land-use fences along the terrace edges to separate the sunny faces from the adjacent flat land.
Now this is another example of land-use fencing. This is following the contours, fencing all the different aspects off from each other.
The fenced areas were ripped along the contour, spot sprayed and planted with Mediterranean saltbush. The faces were also aerially oversown with a mixture of dryland grass, legume and herb species and left 2 years to establish. The results were spectacular. Fencing allowed vegetation to accumulate on the previously bare sunny faces and the salt bushes grew rapidly. The mixture of legumes, grasses, herbs and palatable shrubs provided a warm sheltered site for stock following pre-lamb shearing and produced a fodder bank for the September feed deficit. The salt bushes produced an abundance of succulent green leaves which were particularly desirable to stock and greatly increased the herbage yield from the block.
This now is an example of a salt bush eaten right off. This is good. This is the fodder bank's been eaten off. They eat it right down to the wood, as you can see. Shows you how they like it, how palatable it is. You can also see the great browsing shape, how it comes out. You can't get at the crown of it. That'll come away again for next year's fodder. There's the little shoots here coming away.
This fodder bank also allowed stock to be kept off the adjacent terrace paddocks during the critical spring windblow period and resulted in greater production from these pastures. The improved vegetative cover on the sunny faces also reduced its rabbit proneness and provided habitat for ladybirds, which helped to control lucerne aphids. In 1985, Mike decided to replace the border dike irrigation on the lower terrace with a much more water-efficient spray irrigation system. This meant that the timing and quantity of water applied could be more accurately controlled. The area watered was increased and shelter planting was extended to further improve irrigation effectiveness. Mike, with assistance from his son Greg, continued with a major fencing and tree planting program, adding stock lanes, shelter belts, woodlots and areas of native and ornamental species. Many of the visitors to Riverside are encouraged to assist with planting and pruning. On an area of very poor soil, supporting only the flatweed Hieracium, lines were ripped and a mixture of conifer and deciduous tree species have been planted. Fertilizer was applied and grasses are beginning to re-establish.
Oh, look at that now. We've got a tussock regenerating right in the middle of the Hyraceum again.
The changes in market trends towards leaner meats and finer wools caused Mike to change his sheep breed from Corriedale to Merino. Using the top rams available and very careful recording and selection techniques, a specialist flock has been developed that produces some of the world's best ultrafine wool. Intensively run merino sheep have potential stock health risks, and great care is taken to avoid animal stress. Clean water, quality pasture, and salt with mineral supplements are always available.
Right, well these are the minerals that we mix for the sheep. That's just straight salt from grass smear with minerals mixed in. It's been many years, probably 20 years we've been working on minerals, both for the soil and for the salt licks in the sheep here.
While at Riverside, Mike has been involved with Federated Farmers, the local Resource Conservation Group, and the Biological Producers Council. He gleans ideas and information from a variety of associates and advisors, maintains a range of conservation and recreational interests, and has made trips to India and Africa. Riverside has many visitors each year, including university, polytechnic, farmer and conservation groups.
I keep hearing about new knowledge, but I've got a belief that there's nothing particularly new, that all knowledge is just out there. It's just sitting out there, it's everywhere. It's just a matter of having the ability to drag it in, to bring it in.
In 1992, Mike was presented with the Canterbury Regional Council's first Resource Management Award for his efforts developing and promoting natural resource management at Riverside.
I really do believe that the Homo sapien, especially the male of the species, is hell-bent on imposing their will on nature rather than sitting back and listening and trying to work along with nature. And that's something I'm quite proud of, that I believe we're trying to do here on Riverside.
In a natural system, a variety of trees, shrubs, grasses and herbs grow together. Mike has continued to overdrill his lucerne paddocks with a mix of grasses and herbs. The take-half and leave-half grazing system has produced vigorous plants and improved yields. The mulching of plant material by stock is rapidly improving soil organic matter levels and water holding capacity. As organic material builds up, earthworms are introduced. The land use fencing and fodder banking have greatly improved the condition of the sunny faces and reduced the early spring feed deficit. Stock health has responded to the improved diet, and salt with a variety of minerals and trace elements is available at all times. Throughout the farm, strategic areas have been fenced out and planted to provide future shelter and shade for stock and wildlife. Landscape values are an important consideration, and an attempt is made to incorporate all fencing and plantings with the general flow of the land. The insidious loss of soil from this property has now been halted. By adapting to and working with nature, Mike has developed an economically and environmentally sustainable management system for Riverside that has made it a better place to live and will leave it a better place for future generations.